working with their administrators and with our other leadership resources as well. So I'm glad to be here and turn it over to Donald.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. We're thrilled that you can join us tonight. We have people from as far west as Hawaii, and I guess as far east as Geneva, Switzerland, and everyone in between. And again, thank you for taking the time. I've had the honor and privilege of being president of the Episcopal Church Foundation for about 8 years. And prior to that, I served on vestries and finance committees and property committees and search committees and served as warden on and off for about 20 years. And most of the time it was very, very important work. But when I got to this job, I realized that one of the things we at ECF probably needed to do was to kind of share stories and ideas with those of you who serve on vestries in parishes large and small, and to realize that it is important spiritual work. Often we ask people to sit on vestries, and in some respects it's a thankless job, or people feel, why me? But what we're trying to do with these web conferences and some of our other leadership resources, including Vital Practices, is just give people some ideas and thoughts and best practices and inspiration to realize that vestry service is critical to the life of the local worshiping community. So what we're going to do today and Wednesday for our subsequent conference is to share some thoughts and ideas with you, and also for you to share your thoughts and ideas with us so that we can realize that as members of vestries, we're not isolated in our own communities, but more and more we're part of this larger group of people who are struggling to lead local congregations in responding to God's call on what we're called to be and do in this time and place. But I learned a lot during my 20-odd years on various vestries, not only what to do, but what not to do. So what we're going to try to do is go through some of the basics, and more importantly, to give you some thoughts and ideas on how a vestry can move to a stronger place, a place of greater discernment, greater spiritual focus, and a greater opportunity to lead congregations during these very exciting and challenging times in the Episcopal Church. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope you find this to be enlightening, inspiring, and informational.
Great. Hi, Brendan. We cannot hear you.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, that is better. Thank you.
So first we'd like to just get a quick sample, sort of get an idea for who all is here, what your knowledge and skills are like. So we have two quick questions, quick poll. First one, so you can see, it's just popped up on your screen, is how long have you served on the vestry? Just to kind of get an idea of who we have here. Of 62 of you are roughly that are participating this evening. So you just click on there real quick and give us an idea of all this. We have lots and lots of new people, and quite a few people in multiple terms too. Okay, it looks like everyone's beginning to finish up. If you haven't already, just click on there how long you've served on the vestry. And it looks like this evening we have about 50-50 split, but with quite a few of you who are brand new to this, and quite a few of you who have been here, or been through rather vestry terms multiple times. So we'll bear that in mind this evening. For those of you who have served before, this may have some stuff that will review for you, and for those who are new, we're going to definitely be breezing through things, but hopefully we'll be able to give you some great foundation and base work for you. We're going to pull up the next poll question. And describe your level of experience and expertise on the vestry. again, we're just looking to get an idea of where you're coming from, how we can just tweak things this evening to be able to best serve all of you who are gathered here. And again, it seems like things are pretty evenly divided up, so we'll definitely bear that in mind. Thankfully, not too many of you are quite on the completely new end, but we'll definitely bear those folks in mind with our presentation as well this evening. Great. So moving on. So again, welcome to Vestry Leadership 101 for those of you who are coming in a little bit late. As Donald has said, again, part one is really to focus on some of the basics and essentials. Just to introduce you to what is a vestry and what does it do, to be able to then go over some key terms, to look at some of those nuances that are particular to the Episcopal Church, and then also looking at the decision-making roles in terms of how vestries function, in terms of how vestries really work. Part two, which is on Wednesday, which I hope all of you will be able to join us for as well, are looking on emerging models of vestry leadership and best practices with well-functioning vestries as well. So moving, and I also want to remind everybody as well that we will have time for questions during this presentation, but at any time, please feel free to use the chat box just to the left and type in your question there. We'll definitely be monitoring that and can answer your questions as well throughout the presentation. So first things first, what is vestry? And as you can see from your picture, this comes from the medieval Latin vestarium, for a cupboard for storing clothes, from vestis for garment. From its use as a robing room for clergy. So I presume for most of you this is not quite what you thought what a vestry is, but here are your roots in this lovely illustration, as you can see. But I think it's actually really enlightening to look at the origin of this term. There are a couple of different suggestions as far as where we've come to adopt the term vestry to describe the leadership body of our congregations. But all of this relates to the gathering of leaders of the congregation in the room adjacent to the sacristy, the vestry room or vestry. In England, the churches would have a chest or cupboard where all of the money and the important documents of the church would be stored there. So the wardens would have the keys to this chest or cupboard, and so when having to make any payments or to updates to parish records, it was the wardens then that would be able to have access to this, and this is where all the important financial and business of the church would take place. In the United States, this was where the leaders would typically gather for meetings. In this case, the men of the church would be gathering. And when they ran out of room, this again is another look at where we come to use this term specifically in the United States. It became an elected body because there just wasn't enough room for all of the men of the parish to be able to gather in this vesting room. So that's just a little history on where we've come to use the term vestry for the leadership of our congregations.
One thing about the Episcopal Church is we love our technical terms, and we also love our kind of rules and regulations. And as you know, the canons of the Episcopal Church dictate certain practices and procedures. And a vestry does have canonical responsibilities, as do other official bodies and persons in the church. And it's important to know what those canonical responsibilities are, but it is more important to realize that that's just the beginning or starting point of what the role of a vestry is. But in terms of official canons of the Episcopal Church, vestries do have certain responsibilities. They are the agents and legal representatives of the parish in all matters concerning its corporate properties and its relations of the parish to the clergy. So that is why the vestry elects the new rector, the vestry enters into contractual relationships with the rector. And the vestry is also responsible for the property aspects of the parish. That includes both real property and financial matters and personal property. They need to ensure that standard business methods are observed. Toward the end of the workshop tonight, we'll provide you some lists of resources for that. But the vestry is expected and responsible for making sure that the parish is run in a business-like fashion. When the parish is without a rector, the officers of the vestry are responsible for making sure that the worship continues during that period of time. In fact, if any of you who are wardens, that is really the only responsibility that is canonically listed of the warden, is to make sure that in the absence of a rector, worship services are carried out in the parish on an ongoing basis. And as Brendan mentioned, if you are wardens and you tell your friends, your non-Episcopal friends that you serve as a warden, they have the connotation of wardens of jails and prisons. And actually the term is similar because wardens are responsible for handling keys and opening and locking up buildings. And that's where the term warden has come from. But obviously the roles of warden have grown over the years, especially during interim periods. And the vestry also has a responsible for nominating persons for holy orders. People who are raised up through a parish need the official vote of the vestry to move on in the process toward ordination. So these are just a brief outline of the canonical responsibilities, and as I said, that's just a stepping off period. But you have to realize that vestries have legal responsibilities both under canon law and under local, state, and state law as well. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes.
So one of the things that's really important, particularly if you're new to the vestry, is to realize that you are, if you don't already, that you're part of a very, very large network, very wide network that spans to worldwide even, that the Anglican Communion, of which the Episcopal Church is a member church, we are one of 44 member churches. The Anglican Communion covers 165 countries. In the United States, which you can see here is shown divided by our provinces, consists of about 6,700 congregations. There are over 1.9 million members. But to realize that as far as where you sit in this picture, the average Sunday attendance as of 2011 was 65 members. So quite often we run into vestry members that feel isolated or are alone in this, and that realize that the average Episcopal church is sitting at that level of 65. If you have more, congratulations, but that there are many, many others that are quite like you, and they're facing very similar issues as well. Oops.
Donald, would you like to?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we have to realize right now is that there are broader cultural trends within the United States and the Episcopal Church that vestry members need to be aware of. And I think we all realize that there are issues of declining numbers, but we also have to realize that there are fluidity of choices in faith that we refer to these folks as nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They're mostly younger people, and 1 in 4 younger people are not affiliated with any religion whatsoever. That at one point we were a majority kind of mainline Protestant country, and now we are a minority mainline Protestant country. We are all aware of the decline in numbers in the Episcopal Church and the aging of our population. We're aware of the fact that there are diminishing financial resources, significant generational differences in giving patterns, the whole issue of emerging church initiatives. mean, these are complex issues that go beyond the scope of this evening's web conference. But I think that the idea here is that the vestry as the governing body and the leadership of a local congregation needs to realize that we are functioning in a changing church in a changing world. And the role of the vestry in 2013 is very different than it was just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, yet alone 20 years ago, and it's going to be very different as we move forward. And I think the point of the map is to indicate that you're not alone. Even if you may be a vestry in a rural part of the United States that's kind of struggling with what the role of the Episcopal Church is, you're basically facing the same challenges and opportunities that people are facing throughout the country and throughout the world. And one of the things we try to do through these web conferences is to reduce the isolation that some vestries or leaders feel because they feel as though their problems are unique to themselves. And pretty much everywhere, as Brendan said, only 4% of Episcopal parishes in the United States have an average Sunday attendance of 350 or more. So while we often hear about the big Episcopal parishes, most Episcopal parishes have 70 people in attendance on a Sunday, a budget of $150,000, a lot of people in kind of aging physical plants that need work. And what we see ourselves at ECF is trying to kind of provide resources and ideas to all of you on how you can cope with these changes. So the world is changing, the church is changing, and therefore the role of the vestry and the leadership of a local congregation also needs to change as well.
Donald was just speaking about some, common, being part of a larger network and identifying some common challenges. I want to just very briefly share with you some research that ECF has been doing among vestry members, like all of you, to identify, we've been asking over the past 2 years small groups of vestry members to identify what some common challenges are. And time and time again, we end up with a list of these 5. There are obviously more than just 5 challenges, but these 5 keep rising to the very top. What you're seeing is obviously a list of the 5, but also a summary of some of the comments that we receive about each of these areas. And the ones that I just want to point out to you, all of you can read, so don't want to go through the full list, but the ones that strike me is under leading change. I'm struck by the fact that people need help managing that change that comes as a result of making healthier decisions. In many ways, a vestry will make a critical decision and then have difficulty managing the change that comes as a result of a very healthy decision toward vitality. So I think that's very important. Under stewardship, many comments that we receive about this topic just note that stewardship continues to be a very countercultural issue. I mean, it goes against the very fabric of maybe even who we are as a nation. And so this is a perennial issue. It's probably been part of being a faithful community since the very beginning. Then the final point is vision and planning. We ask 2 questions. One is, what do you need the most help in? And then secondly, what are you most interested in learning more about? And vision and planning is the topic that is by far and away the area that people are most interested in. I don't know if that reflects your congregation, but I mention this simply to say, there are a lot of Episcopal congregations who are looking to the future, who are trying to figure out how to navigate some of the challenges. and want to be engaged in the strategic planning process that will help them to go about doing so. So again, this is all to just note you're not alone in identifying some of these challenges and also opportunities. Great. So with all of that said, let's just pause and take a few questions if any of you have questions.
Lee had an interesting one. What do you mean by stewardship is countercultural? I guess the idea would be that our theology of stewardship, where we believe that everything we have comes from an all-generous, all-loving God, and therefore we have a responsibility to give back and be good stewards of the gifts we are given, is countercultural to kind of the consumer society that people face on a daily basis through advertising and through kind of the need to accumulate more goods. I think that's what we're hearing, that our responsibility as leaders of local congregations is to instill in people the theology of stewardship and also the practical aspects of what does it mean to be a steward of creation, a steward of financial resources, a steward of human resources, and how do we share that not only with our faith communities, but the wider community and the world. So I think that's what we're that's some of the dilemmas and questions we're getting from people out in the field.
And I would just jump in as well and add that it's specific to financial stewardship, which is usually one of the poking through the most for people, that unchurched backgrounds, families from mixed religious backgrounds or no religious background. I can attest to my experience from my last parish that are just unfamiliar with this, what this means and what this actually accounts for, why and how Christian giving is different. Frequently we were running into this as people were equating this to giving to any array of their charities or nonprofit giving, and to really stress how giving to your church and contributing to your church community is different than giving to other nonprofits and charities.
Elsa, that's a very good question, and it's critical, and that's one of the things we're going to be focusing on in kind of our web conference on Wednesday. But basically the point is, in those situations, as you move to part-time clergy, the role of the vestry, the role of the lay leaders becomes more critical. And as we move forward, we're going to be talking about the kind of the traditional roles of vestries, but we're also going to be talking about the need for partnerships between the clergy and the vestry, whether that clergy person is full-time or part-time, and being responsible for the strategic, mission-based spiritual life of the community. But as you do go to part-time clergy, a lot of those things that people feel is clergy responsibility is really responsibility for the leadership of the community. And we're going to be talking more about that.
Great. So you see some really great questions. I think maybe we can return to a few of those in our later conversation. Just because of time, maybe we should move on to the next section. But please enter your questions into the chat, and I'm noting them, and we'll bring them up at a later time.
Moving on, some key terms. The Episcopal Church has its own language in many ways. We've already named some of these, such as warden. Even vestry itself is an unfamiliar term. So we just want to take a moment to, again, go over some of these key essential terms, particularly for those of you who are new to vestry service. Hopefully this will be a bit of a quick refresher for those of you who have served multiple times before, because we, again, want to emphasize a good foundation on understanding who's who, what's what, and who is responsible for what. So moving in with the vestry versus bishops committees. Really, the vestry of a parish is coming from a parish that is financially self-sustainable. A bishop's committee is a parish that is receiving financial support from a diocese. So when you're looking at and hearing these terms used, and you're wondering, well, why is mine called something different? These are the two nuances and the differences between vestry and a congregation that's a parish will have a rector. Bishop's committee works with their vicar, their priest in charge. A priest in charge actually, as one person pointed out last time we brought with this, can be, is just any temporary assignment. So if you see that, that means it's been a temporary post. Vicars when they're so again, we've previously talked about the rector, the victor, and your bishop, of course, is very important. Some places will have more than one bishop, but the bishop is the chief sacramental officer of a specific diocese or regional area. Again, coming from episkopos, Greek for overseer. And then the common terms that you'll be hearing a lot about as a vestry member are canons and bylaws, and these equate to church rules. And so these are when people are talking about, well, you can and can't do this, and where that's coming from. Canons are essentially church laws. There are church-wide canons, which all dioceses and congregations must adhere to, and diocesan canons and policies which congregations within that particular geographic boundary must adhere to. Dioceses are able to craft canon and policy to better suit their congregations, and your individual vestries in turn are able to develop bylaws to better serve the needs of your particular local community. The church-wide canons, diocesan canons and policies, and parish bylaws are all what come together to define your role as a vestry, your vestry job description.
I'm looking at some of the questions. Bill Dubois says, what do the nuns want, and what do they need, and what is our most authentic good news to them? And that's actually a good segue to the next section, because vestries do have fiduciary responsibilities, and as I said, you have there are canonical responsibilities, and under state law you have fiduciary responsibilities both under state law and church law. But it's different than serving on a board of trustees of a typical nonprofit or for-profit corporation or company. The idea of vestry service is that you are being called by God to serve as leaders and facilitators and mission-based partners to your local faith community and beyond. And we talked about being a steward and not an owner of resources and assets under your care, and that goes back to this whole issue of stewardship in our tradition and in our theology, is that everything we have comes from an all-loving and all-giving God. So the way we approach stewardship of our resources is very different than a shareholder or a corporate CEO would. Our job is to make sure that the resources we care for, whether they're buildings or property or endowments or people, are well taken care of for the next generation of believers in our community. The other thing that's also important is that when you serve on a vestry, you have to kind of put aside your own vested interest. We have on the slide, you're not a member of Congress. You're not there to represent a particular interest or a constituency. And often, you may have come to vestry service through being on the finance committee, or through being on the altar guild, or being in the choir, or being on the outreach committee. But when you come to the vestry, you really need to have the big picture in mind. And you're not there as the choir representative. You're there because you represent the diversity, the broader constituency of the congregation. And you have to really make sure that you approach your decision-making and your official roles and responsibilities with this big picture in mind. And it's difficult sometimes, especially when your connection to the community has been involved in one particular ministry or one particular program. When you come to the vestry, you have to have the big picture in mind, and we'll talk a little more about that. Any questions at this point?
There are two, this is Miguel, and there are two very good questions from Andrea McKellar and Roger Hungerford about resources for creating bylaws. And I will confess that I don't know of any resources for creating bylaws, but perhaps Donald and Brendan, do you have any insights?
Yes. Well, first you will need to turn to your diocesan canons. Those will typically provide you the framework for what you're able to do, what you're required to do in many cases. And so that those will be able to provide you some framework in terms of what you can and can't do, and what you are also responsible for doing in terms of your parish bylaws. It's sort of a two-parter when it comes to that, because you have to adhere to sort of your diocesan canons, but it's also important to take into consideration your local state nonprofit law. So if there is a church that you think that operates really well, and you think that, gosh, they seem to really have it together, I would really recommend phoning them up, seeing if you can get a copy of their bylaws to review through them and to see what they have on their books. That's always a really great place to start. In some dioceses, you might be able to also hit up the chancellor, who is the person who handles all the legal affairs for the diocese. Some of them are more busy than others, so kind of gauge that based upon what you're getting from your diocesan folks and what they're communicating to you. So that would be sort of my suggestions on that.
And the other thing you should also think about, and this again we'll talk more about on Wednesday, is beyond bylaws. You should also think of a vestry covenant or norms and practices on how you do your business, because canons and bylaws are important in terms of kind of the nuts and bolts of traditional roles. But as the role of the vestry grows into that of being the leader in mission and strategy and the spirituality of the congregation, it's very important that there are expectations of how the vestry operates, there are expectations of membership, and it's not just about canons and bylaws. It's about leading a local faith community in an ongoing discernment process on how they're going to be the body of Christ in a particular place in a particular time. But we'll say more about that as we move forward.
I'll also note two participants are mentioning that also worth note, it's that the Diocese of Connecticut has some sample bylaws on their website, and Wesley Brown, the Diocese of Massachusetts, so that might be a place to begin to see also sample bylaws. Great. In terms of vestry covenants, we do have actually resources on ECF Vital Practices about vestry covenants, and even I think some examples of good vestry covenants. And so I'd encourage you to check that out, and we'll try to get a link to you before the end of the evening. So, go ahead. Sorry.
So now we're going to move into our third part of this evening, as talking about the vestry as a decision-making body, how it is that you function, what you're here to do, and how to function well together.
As I said earlier, I think we always have to go back to the mission of the church. When we look at anything we do in any position, especially a vestry, and in the prayer book, the mission of the church is to restore people to unity with God and each other in Christ. I think it's helpful for vestry members, both individually and corporately, to look at the baptismal covenant, which in some respects is kind of the job description of a vestry. Again, this goes beyond the canonical and legal responsibilities. But the vestry is the body at the congregational level that needs to engage people and empower them and encourage them and to walk alongside them in living out what it means to be Christians and Episcopalians in a particular locality. It's really clear, it's really important that vestry members learn how to work together. And, there are a lot of norms and practices that help make that happen better. We've all experienced, the post-vestry meetings in the parking lot. I mean, those are practices that really are counter, that basically work against this idea of the vestry being a cohesive body that is the face of the congregation and represents the congregation. It's also important that you have norms and expectations on how you communicate what happens at vestry meetings, how you communicate, how you avoid things like triangulation, and most important, how you deal with conflict. What we're finding at the local level and the diocesan level is that conflict is becoming more widespread. And usually conflict occurs over two issues, the issue of leadership and the issue of money. And right now, those are two areas where we're really experiencing some challenges in the Episcopal Church. Leadership, and some of it is, I think, both at the clerical and the layperson level, is people don't necessarily know how to exercise good leadership during times of challenge, or people have issues around limited financial resources. So it's really important that in times of conflict, whether it's conflict within the community or conflict with the rector or the priest, it's really important that the vestry remain the calm, collected, cohesive body that tries to keep the congregation together during these times. When things are going well, it's easy to be a member of any corporate body or vestry or member of a committee. But it's when things do not go well, when it's really important that the vestry have an experience remaining cohesive, focused, and calm in times of difficulty and conflict. Two key areas. Now, this goes back to the kind of the traditional legal roles of vestry members, which are critical. And when I talk about this emerging role, I am not trying to belittle the legal responsibilities of vestry members. You do have a fiduciary responsibility, and you do have to make sure that there's proper asset and financial management and oversight. You have to ensure that you are paying salary and benefits for clergy and lay staff as mandated by diocesan and wider church requirements. You're responsible for making sure that you have insurance and policies and procedures in place to deal with accidents and other incidents. You have to realize that local churches are not exempt from a lot of local laws, especially in the area of labor and employment. And you also have to make sure that you deal with issues of misconduct or sexual harassment or discrimination. And the way to do that is to have policies and procedures in place. And a lot of those are mandated by your diocese. They're mandated by national and local canons. But the idea of liability is to prevent bad things from happening to begin with. So you make sure your property is well maintained. You make sure you have liability and property insurance in place. You make sure you have policies and procedures to make sure that people do engage in safe church training and you follow all the policies and procedures on dealing with young people, children, and anyone who is at risk. So those are still two critical areas that vestries need to be responsible for, and we clearly, through our resources, try to give you guidance in making sure you do that. But as I mentioned earlier, a vital vestry will go much further. And, traditionally, in the Episcopal Church and other denominations, you'd have the Board of Trustees or the vestry responsible for the temporal affairs of the parish, as I mentioned, the fiduciary responsibilities, the liability issues, and the clergy being responsible for the spiritual aspects of the congregation. I really think as we move forward, and some of the questions about congregations that move from full to part-time clergy, I think these lines need to be blurred in a positive way. And we at ECF more and more are advocating for a partnership between the clergy and the lay leadership, namely the vestry, in being jointly responsible for the vitality of the community. And a vital local faith community, whether it's a parish or a mission or a congregation, does not only take care of its temporal needs and its buildings and its finances, but is also the body in partnership that determines the mission focus, the strategic direction, and the evangelism of the community. I mean, there were questions about the nuns or people in the community who are yearning for some kind of spiritual connection. That's not solely the responsibility of the priest. It is a joint responsibility of the vestry and the other parish leadership and the clergy working together. And we're finding that, especially as we go through these changing times in the church and the world, unless and until there are these effective partnerships between the lay leadership and the clergy, the local faith community is not going to thrive or grow or continue to serve the needs of its members or the people in the wider community. So you'll hear more about that if you join us on the web conference on Wednesday. But I think the message I'm trying to leave you all is that you have an important fiduciary and legal responsibility, but in terms of being a vital vestry or a vital congregation, you have to move to these new, dynamic, and exciting roles and responsibilities. Can't hear you.
Brendan, we cannot hear you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'd just like to wrap up a bit with ideas for building your toolbox for your vestry members. Some of you may have orientation materials for your vestry. I encourage you to review through those, or if you don't have anything, to build up something for everybody to have, especially if they're new to the vestry, to be able to get an idea for what they're doing on the vestry. And these would include things such as the canons of the Episcopal Church and looking up the canons for your diocese, any of the relevant bits for nonprofits for your state and your corporation laws that affect you, bylaws if you have them, your mission statements for your parish and for your diocese, dig out that as well. History of your congregation, of your community, get a sense of where you've been, where you've come from. And the demographic trends, who's out there, what's happening in your community around you. There are a number of resources that you can Google up and be able to get for free to get an idea of that if you haven't done that. And as well on vital practices for some great activities, particularly for your vestry to get together and get out there and to be able to take a look about what's in your community. Of course, the Book of Common Prayer is an excellent resource to always have at your side. And last but certainly not least is the Bible. And is for all Christians, but I cannot emphasize enough for anyone in a leadership role, particularly with your leadership roles, that reading the Bible is not an option. And to please take every opportunity to read the Bible. In your vestry meetings, begin that with reading something from the Bible. In your own daily life and prayer practice, to really be able to take those moments that you can to be able to read the Bible, that to be able to ground you spiritually and in your mission and service.
I mean, the other thing I think would be helpful is if you come up with a job description of a vestry member, especially as you go recruiting new vestry members, because often people have no idea what it means. It goes back to the issue of norms and expectations. You outline the fiduciary responsibilities, the mission responsibilities, the evangelism responsibilities. It's really helpful for especially busy people to know what they're getting into. And this toolbox could be very helpful in saying, well, this is some of the stuff that may be helpful as you decide whether or not you want to be part of the vestry. Informed decision making. I think sometimes people think of vestries as kind of serving on a committee that has no beginning, no end, and no real purpose. And I think that's why vestries sometimes get a bad rap, and people say, "Gee, I much rather be involved in my own ministry or serve as chair of stewardship or outreach." I think as you focus on some of these issues we're talking about today, people are going to want to serve on vestries because they're going to want to be part of this dynamic group of leaders who are moving the congregation in a mission-focused way.
So that was the majority of the presentation. We raised a few issues in this last section, especially around fiduciary responsibility, liability, and we also kind of hinted at a broader role of the vestry. So we invite you to. We're going to spend, I guess, the last few minutes just taking questions. And hopefully having a conversation, and that's somewhat limited because we have to, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have to be on mute to cut out noise interference. But if you can share your questions in the chat room, we'll happily say them out loud and try to respond. And I have two to get started. A little bit earlier in the conversation, someone mentioned about their challenge as a new member of the vestry was working with older, maybe multiple term people on the vestry, and possibly even people seasoned persons in the congregation. And if I didn't repeat that correctly, just please let me know. So I don't know if either Donald, you or Brendan have insights or thoughts about how someone who's new to the vestry can kind of navigate that.
It's interesting. I think new blood in any organization is very healthy. And often you'll learn more about your congregation by asking a newcomer why he or she came and why he or she stays than you might from someone who's there for 50 years and is just there because they've always been there. So I think newer members of the vestry it's a unique opportunity for the veterans to partner with the new members of the vestry, and you'll find out a lot more information, and I think it'll be a lot more dynamic process. What is often helpful is if you assign a mentor, a companion, or coach, or whatever, so that when you have a brand new vestry member, that person is paired up with someone who's been on the vestry before. And you encourage them to go to lunch, have a cup of coffee, get to know each other, and that's also helpful in not only orienting the new vestry member, but also helping the veteran learn things about the parish or about vestry service or about leadership that he or she may not have known.
Okay. Ron Irvin, I saw your hand was raised. Because we had to mute everyone because of noise interference, if you could type your question into the chat box, that would be a lot easier for us to be able to respond to that. For those we've had a few comments about the fact that the Wednesday web conference is quote unquote sold out. Just so you know, we will send the recording of this web conference and Wednesday web conference to everyone who registered, whether you were signed up for part 1 or part 2. All of you will receive recordings of both. So that should be coming, I would hope, Thursday or Friday.
Marcy had a question. What about veteran vestry members who are opposed or resistant to change? I think it's important that serving on a vestry, like serving in any leadership capacity, needs to be a result of a discernment process. And maybe we need to kind of look at this. I mean, what we do on the ECF board is we have what we call a mutual discernment process. When we identify someone who we think might be interested in serving on our board, we engage them in a conversation back and forth on what their expectations would be about serving on the board and what our expectations are, and seeing if there's a match. And I think it's okay to tell somebody, saying, listen, you've been an incredibly faithful member of the vestry for a lot of years, and we still need your wisdom and experience. But perhaps this is a time to step aside and let some new people be on the vestry, because we have different challenges, we have different opportunities, but we still want to affirm you. Vestries aren't the place to put people where you have no idea where else to put them. People who have been faithful members, who may be curmudgeons, and you want to kind of honor them, you don't put them on the vestry. People on the vestry need to be people who are team players, who have their own strong opinions, but who are willing to live by consensus and to live by the norms that you establish. So I think it's okay for the leadership of the parish or the rector of the parish to say, Donald, we love you, but we don't think vestry service is the best place for your skills, talents, and calling at this point in time.
I'd also throw in, I remember that Dana's question, she also mentioned that they had an average of 30 members. While this is a relatively new idea that's out there, but I'm going to put in the chat box a link to an article by a really fascinating thing called an all-church vestry. The congregation was a small rural congregation, had conversations with their diocese, and they were able to develop canonical structures to be able to provide them the all-church vestry, which has been a boon for them to be able to share in the leadership. So there have been some really wonderful creative solutions for smaller congregations where it's just not practical or feasible to have 12 elected members, and that also you can look to change too. If you're still trying to elect 12 people to the vestry, and you're like, oh my gosh, how are we supposed to do that? In many cases, you don't have to have that many people on there, and reducing it to 6 or 5 it may be a much more sustainable number for being able to function well and as the leadership body of your church. So I'd encourage you to look into that.
And if you're a congregation of 30, you may only want 3 or 4 people as the vestry. The idea, how do you avoid burning people out? Part of the issue, what we don't do well in the Episcopal Church is help people discern their passions and their gifts for ministry. We ask them to do things. And if you engage people in the conversation about why you're in this community, what are you passionate about and what do you feel God is calling you to do, that's a much better way to get that person involved than saying, do you want to chair the Buildings and Grounds Committee, or do you want to chair the Finance Committee because you happen to be an accountant? We all busy people, but when we're asked to do something we care about or we're excited about or we're passionate about, we're going to say yes. So the idea is that I think it's really important that whether you have 300 members or 30 members, that you have a process of discerning people's gifts. And it may not be vestry service. It may be that they much rather be, kind of hands-on in a nuts and bolts ministry or program. But it's really important that you engage in this process, and that's the way you avoid burnout, and more importantly, that's the way you get the right people on the bus.
A really nice comment from Shannon in Geneva, just about how, as senior warden, organizing social events kind of before the vestry meeting is a really nice way of getting newer members and some more many term members to work together a little bit more fruitfully. And I think that's a great insight.
Well, I think vestry retreats, even if they're just day-long retreats or Saturday morning retreats, spending time on just getting to know each other, spending time on Bible study, spending time on having people tell their stories. It's real, you learn a lot about a person having them tell their story, and whether it's the story of how they came to the Episcopal Church or how they came to their parish, or their story about how they first experienced the love of God. It's really important. Oh, that's a great question about, yeah, we'll take that under advisement. But I think you all have an incredible opportunity to look at the best practices of both the polity of the ELCA and the Episcopal Church, and come up with, some new super duper way of being the leadership of a local body of Christ. So maybe, Charles, you can give us some insights into that. But let's stay in touch with Charles. I'm really intrigued by that.
Yeah, I think that's very good. So we have a few slides to share, which are just resources that we hope that you are aware of. The Vestry Resource Guide is a publication of the Episcopal Church Foundation, and it gives an overview of everything that we've been talking about and more. Another great resource is ECF Vital Practices, and it's online, free, has articles and tools and blogs, just covering what many people say is that they really appreciate hearing from other congregations what they are doing and some of the challenges that they are facing and some of the things that they are trying out to address those challenges. One of my favorite aspects of ECF Vital Practices is that we don't always tell success stories. We tell also the stories of people who are navigating those challenges and are figuring things out along the way. And so hopefully you'll find some inspiration there as well. Finally, the Manual for Church Business Methods. This is a absolutely essential manual for vestries. We spoke about the kind of financial responsibilities of vestries. This is a really great tool that's available on the episcopalchurch.org website, and we hope you keep it handy as well. If you would like to contact us, please, here is our contact information, our email for the Leadership Resources area, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. I guess my final note is that all of you should have received or will soon receive an email with a survey link, and we're always trying to improve our web conferences, and so I really hope that you take a moment just to let us know your thoughts, and so that we can continue to improve these educational events.
I guess my final comment to you all is that you're doing important work, and do it responsibly, but do it joyfully as well. And it's really important. It's important to your local faith communities. And if you feel you can't do it responsibly or joyfully, maybe it's time to do something else. So God bless you all, and we're thrilled that we were able to spend some time with you this evening.
And we just got a great question about downloading the slides. Roger and everyone, if you look right now just to the left of the chat box, download files, you'll see a PDF of the presentation, and you can click that and then press the button download files. You can also we've compiled a list of resources which you can download as well. In our upcoming email to all of you, we'll send out also a link to a PDF of all the slides. So you'll receive these links.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.